Well, hello, my dear listeners. Today is a special occasion. Did I just Yoda my voice? Whoops. Anyway, today is a special occasion. Today, this video is 6 Cryptid Encounters from Reddit, which is a first for this channel. I don't think I've done Cryptid Encounters. Another first for this channel is this video features a good friend of mine and other narrator on YouTube. He goes by Chronopasta or UncleChrono. I will link to him in the description, on the end screen, in any story he's doing. I'll put the little card thingy up. I think I can only do like 4 of those, so I'll link him up there as well. Yeah, please give him the love you give me. He is a fantastic narrator. He has a fantastic voice. He has the absolute drive to do this. He puts love into everything he does in this, and I love his channel and I love the things he narrates. So again, this video is 6 Cryptid Encounters from Reddit, featuring Chronopasta, or UncleChrono. I don't know how he wants me to call him out. I'm going to call him both. Chronopasta, UncleChrono. Uncle Chronopasta. Uncle Chrono. Yeah, so enjoy. Enjoy.
Added more details to gray areas in hopes of similar experiences or more clarity. This may be nothing, or maybe it's something, but it's been on my mind for a while, and I thought I would share. Recently, my mom has been talking about me in my younger years, preschool to 1st or 2nd grade. I don't recall, but she said my teachers all called me an empath when it came to the feelings of other students, taking their pain as my own. I can always feel the room, the house, a class, like some people's bones hurt before a storm. I have always picked up on the bad before it happens. By no means am I an anxious individual. These events did not impact my growing up. It was kind of something on the back burner. If it feels tense, I feel it too. My parents are not emotional people. My father being a lawyer and my mom a fitness instructor. Those types. This has not been talked about with my parents whatsoever. I want to say it's childhood and kids distort memories, but it is the feelings that make the memories so vivid. I loved where I grew up. It was far enough away and tucked in a little corner that my parents were comfortable with me being outside for hours, doing as I pleased. I love the area and the house I live in. My house was white with pillars on the front overlooking about an acre of land filled with trees, and we are sat at the very end of a cul-de-sac. I had the best room because I had these huge princess-esque, what I wanted to call them, windows that sat floor to ceiling and allowed the light from the room below. The kitchen, to light up my room just a tad. I could see the woods, the butterflies in the summer. I could hear my parents below me. I lived in the safest area possible. It may have just been childhood paranoia, but it wasn't anxiety I was feeling. It was like waiting. I never once had a sense of relief growing up, anywhere. Whether it be at school or at home, preschool specifically, and up until elementary school, I remember checking all the doors just one last time, and asking my mom if the alarms had been set for the night because of things that I would feel in my room. I never told her why. I would wake up in the middle of the night, whatever time it was, as I was too young to have an alarm clock, to the feeling of dread for years. Preschool through elementary school, the feeling happened infrequently, but just often enough for me to think like, okay, here's that thing. Maybe if I don't move, nothing will happen. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the feeling of eyes on you, or being watched from afar. This is the feeling that would burn into me and wake me up for what I felt as I laid awake. As mentioned before, I've always been able to feel the room. The feeling of dread and guilt would hang in the air, and all I could do was pretend I was somewhere else. Some nights, though, was brave enough to look up, and I am so beyond certain that these instances, the ceiling was darker than black. My open windows that would usually illuminate my plastic star-covered ceiling instead illuminated nothingness, just up. Imagine a funnel upside down, jet black, warping, and that is what it looked like. I would stare into it. This cold and heavy black vortex over my head, over my room. I have memories pleading in the dark to come back a different night in my head. This is very profound, the begging and the returning. This happened for years. I remember pleading in my head to something to just take me a different day. Although I do not remember anything past this, I don't know if this shit is aliens or my dumb 5-year-old brain being 5. But this is some other weird stuff that's floated around my thoughts, and I was hoping maybe someone else had a similar experience. Oh, too long, didn't read. 5-year-old me thinks aliens were poking around at night in my room.
I've been a longtime lurker on Reddit, especially this forum, and have finally decided to post this life-changing and defining experience that I had when I was about 9 or 10 years old. When I say life-changing and defining, I truly do mean that. Ever since I had this experience, I have had an obsession with the other world, and I know in my heart that there is a lot more to this earth than what we can see with our eyes. I had a lot of really strange experiences at this property, but what I'm writing about was the beginning of a weird few years. Backtrack about 13 years and I'm 9 or 10 years old. My parents and I had just moved up to a mountain in the Gold Coast hinterland, Tamborine Mountain, in Australia. Absolutely beautiful place full of national parks and tropical rainforests. To explain the layout of our old property, there was the main house, and about 100 meters to the left of the main house was a large shed. Separating the main house from the shed was a garden area with a little path leading from the shed to the house. It was just after dark, maybe 7 p.m. My mom was inside the main house making dinner, and for some reason I was outside with my dad at the shed whilst he was unloading things from the back of the truck with one of his mates. I helped for a little bit, but when it came to the bigger objects, I was just sitting around and admiring our beautiful new property. I can still remember this like it happened yesterday. So I'm sitting down and waiting for my dad to finish up so we can get back to the main house, and for some reason, and to this day I still do not know why, I had this intense urge to look over to my right into the bushes which separated the main house from the shed. At first, I couldn't really tell what it was, but the longer I stared at it, the more I realized it was not a trick of light or my imagination. About 30 feet away from me was a small thing, walking parallel to where I was sitting, wading through the bushes. It was walking at a normal pace, but pushing the bushes back to make way for itself. I could only see the side profile of this thing, but I could see that over its body it was wearing something black, almost like a black cloak. From the side profile of its face, I could make out a pointed nose with sharp cheekbones and a large hole where I'm assuming its eye was. It was probably about 3-4 feet high and had the stature of a small child. I saw it for probably about 5 seconds. I think that was probably the first time in my life I had an adrenaline rush. My heart dropped to my stomach and I felt sick and confused. I couldn't speak or move. All I could do was utter fear and terror and this thing. I stood up and quickly bolted inside the shed and waited for my dad to finish up because no way in hell was I going to walk back to the house by myself. It never looked at me. For all I know, it could have been before. But when I saw it did not look at me or acknowledge me. I did not sleep in my own bed until I was 13 after that experience. I was utterly scared of the dark, and still to this day, I don't like going outside after dark by myself. The older I got, the more I began to research paranormal topics. I tried for so long to convince myself that it was just a hallucination, but I know in my heart that it was not. The best description that I could give it would be that it looked like an alien gray, but the thing is, it still had proportionate features, if that makes sense. I know this sounds insane, but it had the features of a goblin, pointed ears and a sharp cheekbone. It was definitely wearing something black over the top of its shoulders, as I didn't see its legs. The most messed up aspect of this experience for me is that to this day, I still have weird nightmares about that property. I've never forgotten that night, or how it has molded and changed my perception of this world. There is so much more out there that we don't know about. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar to this?
First of all, high chances that it's an illusion or hallucination, but I wasn't sure. Hey people, last year I had some weird occurrences happen to me. In daylight and when I was awake, I had some problems too. But I guess those are for another topic. Anyways, a couple years ago, maybe 2, I frequently seen some visions after I wake up from my sleep in the middle of the night. And those visions lasted no more than a sec, but I always felt like they were a little long and vivid. I don't know how to tell this, but it felt like the time was bent. I knew those visions were short, but it felt a little bit longer. Continuing, this has been happening since I was a little boy. The earliest recall is having a huge ass white spider on my bed crawling upon me. There are some examples in the middle now, but I don't want to go into unnecessary details that much. There's just one guy who I've seen more than once. He's a guy with the look of a thief, a burglar. Once when I was a child I saw him in my dream. A white skin, well-shaven face, or his beard doesn't grow. He wears all black with a cap and leather gloves and so on, and his face is unrecognizable and blurry. Again, when I was a child, I had a dream in which I was lying on the couch in my living room and my mother and father were praying, indifferent of me and my chilling, until this guy comes in and looks at me and starts making his way towards me, hands stretched like a mummy. Closes in, his face inches away from mine that I can see his iris clearly. I wake up and I see a glimpse of him and wet myself crying. Last summer when I was sleeping, I suddenly woke up without no reason, no bad dreams or anything. And when I opened my eyes, it was this mofo again standing beside my bed and watching me with a gas lamp in his right hand. I was fully awake, and although the light burned and hurt my eyes, I could only see his grin. I felt it was him. Although I was frightened, I suddenly had an anger towards the guy, and these emotion changes happened in like 2 seconds. I was mad, pissed at the guy because my eyes were hurting from all the light that burned in my face. I yelled at the top of my lungs like, "I've had enough of you, motherfucker." And while bolting out of the bed to punch him, if it was a solid body, that would have been a perfect punch. But as soon as I did that, he pixelated thousands, millions, billions of pixels like gold dust. The pixel's color was gold, flying up in the air. It was almost like Thanos had snapped. But that movie wasn't even around. And I've never seen that guy after I punched him to oblivion. What was that?
This story is about an Indrid, which is the Grinning Man. They didn't mention that in the story, they mentioned it in the title, so I thought I would throw it on here. So I just found out that this truly horrifying experience is actually a cryptid. Okay, so this was and still is a truly horrifying and scarring experience I had maybe last year. Even typing about this gives me anxiety and flashbacks. So the story is very simple. There are only 3 other encounters with this being that are documented that I know of, and it was very fast but very traumatizing like I stated earlier in this post. So I stayed up in my room a little bit later than I intended. I was on the computer facing away from my door, and out of the corner of my eye, I see him waving at me, from around the wall only exposing his hand and face. I quickly spun my head around to look, and he was gone, instantly. I sat there frozen in fear for maybe 10 to 20 minutes. I finally got up and checked behind the wall. He was just gone. Nowhere to be seen, and I thought it was some sort of hallucination. Hi, howdy. So, I have what my friends say is automatonophobia, which is the fear of robots or inanimate objects that resemble humans. I say they're full of it because I don't fear wax sculptures or robots. I fear skinny humanoid creatures that walk on all fours or walk strangely, like the Rake. I'm pretty desensitized to that now. Or 096, which I'm also desensitized to. And I personally believe it all stemmed from my encounter with one who I deemed the Milkman in a fruitless effort to rid my fear of him. It was about 3/4 of a year ago. It was icy and in the middle of an ice storm, and I was home alone. I decided to walk outside by myself at night. Very smart, yeah? Mind you, back then, I lived in the middle of nowhere. My closest neighbor was a good ways away, and I had tons of land between me and human civilization. The nearest town was 20 minutes away in a car. We lived on a huge plot of land, and there was a stretch of drive that I loved walking down. It connected our driveway to our other land that we owned. It was about 3 miles long, and surrounded by dense shrubbery and thickly tangled trees. It kind of looked like a scene in Lord of the Rings. I loved walking down the stretch, especially at night, because, at the time, I was a huge horror fanatic, and nothing could scare me. Now, the trees were really thick, and even though the moon was out and it reflected off the icy snow and stuff, there was little snow on the stretch, and it was nearly pitch black, so I brought a flashlight. I began to walk, and halfway through, I hear a noise, like heavy breathing, kind of labored sound. I assumed it was my dog, Bruin, and I called out to him. The noise stopped, and I got that feeling of run, 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 but I didn't, because I was a stupid teenager. A few seconds ticked by, and suddenly I heard from the direction of the noise what sounded like movement, and then something 4-legged running my way. It had that distinct sound that dogs or cats have, you know? So, again, I assumed Bruin. He was a shy dog, he just ran off. I continued walking for a while, and was pretending I was in some elvish, fantastical fantasy land, but then I heard another noise. This time, it sounded like something was following behind me, like, slowly. Kind of like a cat stalking its prey almost. I could hear a deep breathing and near growl/purr. Mind you, cougars and wildcats were an issue up there, but normally you just make super loud noises, and for the most part, they just leave you alone. So I started screaming the lyrics to some song, and I heard scuttling, and then the thing ran behind the shrubs and away from me. So, whatever, I was fine. I continued walking, and then I saw something in front of me. Like I said, the ground wasn't white since the snow couldn't come through the trees, but there was this white, slightly moving object in the middle of the 2-foot wide path. Once again, I got that run feeling, but I ignored it, not because I was stupid, but because I was frozen. If I had to describe it, Just imagine someone super skinny and hunched over, like they were reading a book. Like it had its arms out to the side a little. I did finally move, and it was to take a step back, which I did quite quietly. But it moved and then got up. This thing was freaking tall, like a good 6'5". It was so skinny, and its arms were just weird and had these huge claws. It slowly turned around, and its eyes were just black with the flashlight reflecting off them. It had this abnormally normal pair of lips, and I couldn't make out its nose. And it was just pure pale skin. I know this sounds like a popular horror genre monster, but this was back before I found them. Like a year before I found out the rake existed or that creepypasta was even a thing. And creepypasta is what led me to SCPs, so... Anyways, it's looking at me and I just stood there. I wasn't even shaking and I couldn't hear anything, I just sat there. It walked toward me, its breathing was short and deep and kind of ragged. It came close enough to touch me, and then it did touch me. It actually left scratches on me. And the feeling of its clammy hands on my bare skin is what finally kicked in my flight response, which I guess me jerking away is what caused it to scrape me. So I ran down the pathway, which I was a good ways down it now. I could hear it behind me, like right behind me. I get to my driveway and I trip because there's this stupid rock which later screwed up the front end of my uncle's car, and I tripped on it. At this point, I didn't hear it, so I assumed I didn't have to rush to my feet, but I rolled over to get up and saw it walking toward me in this horrible, awful way. I panicked and got up and ran inside, slammed my screen door, then my front door. I locked the front door and back door and all the windows. Then I put myself in front of the front door to keep it from coming in. I waited there for an hour or more, and I peeked out of the peek hole, which I had to tiptoe to see out of, but I didn't see anything, and I couldn't hear anything. So I opened the door to check, and it was right there, hunched over, one claw poked through the screen. I could feel its breath, and I could hear it breathing, and it just looked at me with those soulless black eyes. I was scared, and it slowly stood back up to its full height. I slammed the door and ran back into my bedroom, locked the door, and hid in my closet. I slept there that night. Then a few days later, I go out to feed Bruin, which I had to walk less than 5 yards away from my front door. I'm feeding him, and I look up, and less than 8 yards away from me is that thing just staring at me. So I ran inside and got my parents, but when we went out there, it was gone. A week later, we found Bruin, stock stiff and dead in our yard, along with her other dog, Polar. No one has ever believed me on this, at all. They say I'm lying, even though, for a while, I had claw marks to prove it. So, that is my story of the Milkman.
I will start off by saying this is going to be a long post. My apologies. I will also state that if I'm posting this in the wrong sub, please tell me. This is the story of an encounter that lasted off and on for almost a decade. Me and the Paleman. This starts around when I was 13 years old. It's worth mentioning that I didn't have a very good home life, but I also wasn't very aware of this fact. I suspected that maybe families were sometimes just like that. Houses were always this messy and decrepit. Parents were always either insanely controlling and accusatory, or they weren't around at all. At this point in my life, I would have to take a bus to school. I would wake up very early to catch it, and it was almost always still dark outside when I walked to the bus stop. In the corner of my eye, there would be, in my yard, the tall gangly figure. He was maybe 7 feet tall, papery white skin and long arms, spindly and long fingers. Humanoid-shaped body that was very, very thin and bony. He had no face to speak of. He gave me a very deep sense of dread whenever I caught a glimpse of him. But oddly enough, he would just stand at the end of the yard. When I would try to look at him, he'd vanish. I thought maybe it was just my imagination. As time went on, he would appear in different places. When we moved, he wouldn't be at our new houses. I figured brought him there. Sometimes at night, when everyone was asleep and the house was dark, in a pitch-black living room, I could swear I saw him, standing in the middle of the room, or sitting on the couch. I avoided passing the living room at night altogether because of him. I was terrified of his presence. When I realized he probably wasn't going anywhere, I decided I should name him. I had an issue with personalizing things growing up. I would give objects names and personalities. It prevented me from wanting to throw things away, and I still sometimes struggle with this. But in this instance, naming him was what I was using to be less scared of him. I named him the Paleman. As my mental health declined and the emotional abuse I was facing became more apparent and rampant, he became more bold. It seemed sometimes when I would be in the shower, I would swear I could see him on the other side of this curtain. I would see it slowly move, as if he were poking it. I would press my back against the wall of the shower and watch him slowly scratch at the curtain. He never tried to open it. He never made noises. I could just see his familiar tall shadow from behind the curtain. He scared me, but I felt confident telling myself he wasn't dangerous. One of the houses he followed us to had a long, poorly lit hallway, so any time of day, if my door was open, I could see him walk past, quietly and quickly in the dark. It almost became comforting to have him there. My mother was rarely home and my brothers didn't seem to notice him. It's like he was there to check up on me. I started to whisper into the dark living room at night, "Good night, Paleman," and I would see him slowly away from the couch. Fast forward to now. I live with my girlfriend, and I started seeing a therapist. Though I haven't mentioned Paleman, when I started taking medication and addressing issues from the old trauma, he started to show up less and less. The last I saw of him, he was in the living room, standing. He was too tall for the room, so his head was a little bent forward. I waved at him. He waved back at me. I said to him, "Good night, Paleman." "Thank you." He bowed his head a bit. I walked to my bed, and he stayed there. In the morning, as always, he was not there. But then the following nights, he also hadn't shown. I was a bit sad to have him leave, but I'm sure it's for the better. I like to think he moved on to better things. I know I sure did.
There you go, my lovely listeners, my dears, my friends, my people. That was a collection of 6 Cryptid Encounter stories featuring Chronopasta or Uncle Chrono. Please go subscribe to his channel. It is in the description. It's the first thing in the description. I'm not putting anything before his channel URL. Please subscribe to him. I want to get him to as many as we have because I want him to have his own custom URL because he deserves it. Go sub to him. Go like his stuff. Find him on Twitter. Follow him. He posts great stuff. He is fantastic at what he does. I appreciate everything he's done for me, and I love working with the man. He is just a great person overall. So there's that. If you did enjoy this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. That tells me you enjoyed it. Subscribing tells me you love my channel and want to keep hearing more. And then also leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. That all said, these stories are sourced in the description below. All of my social links are also in the description below. And I don't really have much more to say on that. So until next time, sleep well.